Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a topic that literally shapes the lives of almost a quarter of the people on Earth. From the outside, Sunni and Shia Islam might seem completely identical, right? One God, one Quran, one prophet. But for 1400 years, the Islamic world has actually walked two distinctly different paths. Think of today's explainer like a common ground sandwich. We're going to start with the big shared foundations, dive deep into the everyday differences and historical splits, and then bring it all back together. Let's get right into it. Just to wrap our heads around the sheer scale here, we are talking about nearly 2 billion Muslims worldwide. It's massive. Out of that global community, Sunnis make up the vast majority, roughly 90%. They're the dominant group in places all across the globe, like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, and Indonesia. Shia Muslims, on the flip side, make up about 10% of the global population, and they form the majorities in countries like Iran and Iraq. So to make sense of all this without getting bogged down, here's our roadmap. We'll look at the 1400-year split, how they pray, sources of authority, views on marriage, Ashura, and pilgrimage, and finally wrap up with two paths, one faith. All right, Section 1, the 1400-year split. The whole divergence really comes down to their names. Sunni comes from the word sunnah. This essentially means they follow the Prophet's tradition, and they believe leadership after he died should be determined by community consensus. Basically, they believe in the caliphate system. Shia, on the other hand, translates to partisans of Ali. Their view? Leadership absolutely wasn't up for a vote. They believe it was a matter of divine appointment meant strictly for the Prophet's family, specifically his cousin and son-in-law, Ali. Moving right along to Section 2, how they pray. Okay, beyond the ancient politics, how do these groups actually live out their faith differently every day? Well, if you walk into a mosque, you can often tell who's who just by looking at how they stand. A Sunni Muslim typically folds his hands across his chest or navel, but a Shia Muslim, he'll stand with his arms resting straight down at his sides because they believe that was the Prophet's original posture. Then you've got the prostration, when they bow down. When Sunnis pray, they place their foreheads directly onto the prayer mat or the carpet. Shia Muslims do something a bit different. They actually place their foreheads on a small piece of clay. Usually this clay is brought all the way from the Holy Land of Karbala, which creates this incredibly profound physical connection to their history during daily worship. Now, what about timing? Both groups are completely aligned on having 5 obligatory prayers a day. But Sunnis strictly perform each prayer in its specific, distinct time slot. They really only combine them in rare emergencies, like if they're traveling or sick. Shia Muslims, however, are perfectly permitted to combine those 5 prayers into 3 daily sessions. So they'll often pray the midday prayer right alongside the afternoon one and combine the sunset and night prayers. Oh, and as a quick side note, the Shia call to prayer actually includes an extra phrase that translates to "come to the best of deeds," which Sunnis don't use. Let's jump into Section 3, sources of authority. So if a Muslim today has a real-world question about life or religious law, who do they actually ask? Sunnis rely heavily on the Quran and the Sunnah, viewing religious leadership as a matter of rigorous scholarship. For them, only the prophets were infallible. Shia operate on a totally different framework. They believe the true, uncorrupted interpretation of the faith comes through 12 specific imams from the Prophet's family. And here's the key difference. They view these imams as completely infallible and divinely protected from making errors. For Sunnis, centuries of scholarly debate eventually evolved into 4 ancient schools of thought, or madhabs. Relying on literally 1,000 years of consensus, Sunnis view all 4 of these schools as entirely valid paths, whether you follow the Hanafi school that's common in Turkey, Maliki in Africa, Shafi in Southeast Asia, or Hanbali in the Gulf. It's a big tent. Shia Islam, though, takes a vastly different approach here. Since they believe their 12th Imam is currently hidden from the world, modern Shiite practice something called imitation. Basically, they require the guidance of a high-ranking, living authority from modern-day issues. So an everyday person will choose a living scholar, known as a marja, like Ayatollah Sistani or Khamenei, and they'll strictly follow his specific rulings. All right, Section 4, views on marriage. Both groups absolutely view marriage as a sacred bond, but there's a huge, fundamental disagreement here about contracts. For Sunnis, marriage is strictly a permanent contract. It's intended to last a lifetime, no exceptions. Shia Islam recognizes that permanent marriage too, but they uniquely permit a second type, temporary marriage. For a Sunni marriage to be legally valid, the requirements are incredibly rigid. You absolutely must have the consent of the bride's guardian, the presence of 2 male witnesses, and a public announcement. Because they view marriage as exclusively a lifetime commitment, Sunnis adamantly reject temporary marriage. They believe the Prophet permanently banned it before he died, so today they view it as strictly forbidden, essentially equating it to adultery. Conversely, the Shia practice of temporary marriage is an actual legally binding contract between a man and a woman for a fixed pre-agreed period of time. It comes with an agreed dowry and a strict expiration date. Once that time runs out, the marriage ends automatically, no divorce required. So why the massive disagreement? Well, Shia scholars argue this practice was explicitly permitted by the Quran and the Prophet during his life, and they believe it was only improperly banned later on by the second Caliph, Umar. Because of that, they consider it completely legally valid today. Okay, moving to Section 5, Ashura and Pilgrimage. The 10th of Muharram, known as Ashura, highlights a massive, really profound emotional divide. For Sunnis, it's actually a day of gratitude. They fast to celebrate God saving Moses from the Pharaoh at the Red Sea. But for Shia Muslims, it is a day of intense, heartbreaking grief. It marks the Battle of Karbala, where the Prophet's grandson, Hussein, was tragically massacred along with 72 of his followers. On this day, you'll see Shia communities wearing black and weeping in solidarity with Hussein's ultimate sacrifice. For them, it is purely a day of tragedy. Then we have the physical journeys of worship. First, the amazing unifying factor. Every single year, both Sunnis and Shia stand completely united, shoulder to shoulder in Mecca for the mandatory Hajj. But Shia Muslims also practice a second type of pilgrimage. It's known as visitation. This is where they travel to the massive shrines of their imams, like Hussein in Karbala and Ali in Najaf, to seek spiritual intercession. Sunnis, however, have a very strict stance against this kind of practice, especially in more conservative traditions like the Hanbali school. While they definitely respect the Prophet's family, Sunnis believe that building these grand, elaborate shrines over graves and praying at them runs the serious risk of shirk, or polytheism. The core belief here is that you should pray directly to God without any intermediaries. That's exactly why you rarely see those elaborate golden domed shrines in Sunni-dominated regions. And finally, Section 6, 2 paths, 1 faith. To bring our common ground sandwich full circle, despite these deep theological differences over history and daily practice, the ultimate foundation of the religion remains exactly the same. Both groups testify to one God and his messenger, they read the exact same Quran, they fast together during Ramadan, and they face the exact same direction when they pray. Ultimately, the Sunni-Shia divide isn't about two entirely different religions, not at all. It's really about two different interpretations of the exact same faith. One path places its emphasis on the consensus of the historical community, while the other places its emphasis on the divine lineage of the Prophet's family. So I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. Next time you're watching the news, recognizing that these two paths stem from a literal 1,400-year-old disagreement over interpretation, how does understanding that history change the way you view current events in the Islamic world? Thanks for exploring this with me on today's Explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.